Maya had always been a proud mother. Her baby, Emma, was the center of her world. Every milestone, every smile, and every little giggle made her heart swell with love. She had been planning this trip for months, her first long flight with Emma. She was excited to visit her family, who lived far away. But the thought of flying with a baby for hours made her nervous. Would Emma cry the entire time? Would she be able to soothe her? What if people judged her for breastfeeding in public? Maya had breastfed Emma many times before, but the thought of doing it on an airplane felt different. It felt like everyone was watching, and somehow, that made her nervous. Are you ready for a powerful, surprising story that will leave you on the edge of your seat? Join us as we dive into Maya's journey, where strength, courage, and unexpected twists take center stage. If you're excited to see what happens next, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We can't wait to hear from you. Let the adventure begin. Once they boarded the plane, Maya immediately felt the stares. She could almost feel the eyes of the other passengers on her as she made her way down the narrow aisle, holding Emma carefully in her arms. She did her best to ignore the whispers and sideways glances, focusing instead on getting settled. The flight was long, and the air inside the cabin was already warm and dry. Maya adjusted Emma's tiny seatbelt and tried to make her comfortable, but she could sense that the people around her were still watching. She could feel their gaze, judging, even if they weren't saying anything out loud. Emma began to fuss as soon as they took off. She was hungry, her little hands reaching for her mother, making soft, whimpering sounds. Maya didn't hesitate. She had done this many times before, feeding her baby when she needed to, no matter where they were. Without a second thought, she gently lifted her shirt and positioned Emma so she could nurse. The plane was a cramped space, and Maya tried her best to make herself comfortable. She covered herself with a light scarf, not because she thought she needed to, but because it felt like the right thing to do in the public setting. As Emma latched on and began feeding, Maya's nerves started to ease. She looked down at her baby, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. This was the most natural thing in the world, and Emma needed to eat. Maya had no reason to feel ashamed. But that peace was short-lived. It wasn't long before Maya noticed the woman sitting across the aisle. The woman's gaze was sharp, and her eyes locked onto Maya with an intensity that felt almost cold. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her lips were pressed together in a tight line. Maya tried to look away, focusing instead on Emma, who was nursing peacefully. She hoped the woman would stop staring, but the woman didn't look away. She continued to watch Maya with that sharp, critical look, making Maya feel even more self-conscious. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. It was hard to ignore the way the woman seemed to judge her every move. Maya shifted slightly in her seat, trying to settle into a more comfortable position, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around her was paying more attention to her than to their own business. She didn't understand why it felt so uncomfortable. Breastfeeding was a natural act, and she had done it countless times before, in public places like parks and cafes. But this felt different. It felt like the judgment was heavier, somehow, like people were staring more than they normally would. Her gaze flicked back to the woman. The other passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, but the woman's unblinking stare was unwavering. Maya tried to remind herself that she had every right to breastfeed her baby in public. It wasn't something to be ashamed of, but with every second that passed, it felt like the woman's eyes were drilling into her, trying to shame her for something that was completely natural. Maya quickly turned her attention back to Emma, willing herself to focus on her baby's soft face. But no matter how hard she tried, the uncomfortable feeling wouldn't go away. The woman's judgment hung in the air, making it harder for Maya to relax. A few minutes passed, and Maya began to settle into a more relaxed state. Emma had quieted down and was nursing peacefully, and Maya allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The plane hummed steadily, and the tension she had felt earlier seemed to ease with each passing moment. She glanced around, seeing a few people looking out the windows, some reading their magazines, others lost in their thoughts. The woman across from her, however, hadn't looked away. Her sharp eyes still rested on Maya, and it made her feel like a target. Just as Maya thought she might be able to escape the feeling of judgment, the woman spoke. Maya's heart stopped for a moment, and the whole row seemed to grow quiet. The woman's voice carried, drawing the attention of the nearby passengers. Maya felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her stomach tightening with a familiar discomfort. The quiet hum of the airplane, which had been a comfort moments before, now felt oppressive. Maya's first instinct was to shrink back, to hide in her seat, and make herself invisible. She had never been one to cause a scene, and the thought of confronting the woman made her stomach churn. But at the same time, the words stung. The woman had no right to make her feel ashamed for something so natural. Her eyes fell to Emma, still suckling peacefully, her tiny hands clutching at Maya's shirt. Maya took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "I'm just feeding my baby," she said softly, keeping her voice steady, but it quivered slightly from the anxiety. She tried to make it clear that she wasn't doing anything wrong, hoping the woman would see reason. The woman, however, wasn't satisfied with the answer. She shook her head and clicked her tongue, her expression disapproving. "It's not about feeding," she said, her voice harsh. "It's about decency. This is a public space, and not everyone wants to see that." The words felt like a slap, and Maya's chest tightened with a mix of anger and hurt. She had seen women being shamed for breastfeeding before, but never with such force. The woman's tone was dismissive, and it felt like an attack, not just on her, but on every mother who had ever nursed in public. Maya's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the woman's judgment bearing down on her, and she wanted so badly to stand up for herself. She wanted to tell the woman that feeding her baby wasn't something she should apologize for, but the fear of confrontation held her back, making her feel small in the face of such harsh words. She thought about covering up with the blanket that was tucked in her bag, but the idea made her feel suffocated. She knew it would make Emma uncomfortable. She didn't want to hide, and she didn't want to apologize for something that was so natural. Instead, she looked down at Emma, whose eyes were closed in contentment. Her tiny mouth moved rhythmically, and Maya's heart swelled with love and tenderness. This was her child, her responsibility, and she was doing the best she could. The fear that had taken root in her chest began to battle with a spark of defiance. She wasn't doing anything wrong. This wasn't something to be ashamed of. For a moment, Maya thought about saying something sharp to the woman, something that would shut her down and make her realize how out of line she was. But the words didn't come. Instead, Maya took a slow, steady breath, trying to keep her voice calm as she spoke again. "I'm feeding my baby. She's hungry. I'm not doing anything wrong." The woman seemed unimpressed. She crossed her arms tightly and looked away, but her gaze still lingered in Maya's direction, as if hoping that Maya would cave into her demands. Maya's heart was still pounding, but the longer she held her ground, the more she realized that she didn't need to apologize or hide. She was doing what was best for Emma, and no one could take that away from her. Despite the discomfort, Maya refused to let the woman's harsh words control her. She wasn't just a mother. She was a person with rights, and feeding her child in a public space was one of them. Maya glanced around, noticing that a few people had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some passengers looked away, as if they didn't want to get involved, but one person in the back of the plane seemed to be watching with interest. Maya didn't know if they would speak up, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that she wasn't entirely alone in this. Maybe someone would see how unfair this situation was and help her stand her ground. But for now, Maya focused on the warmth of Emma's body in her arms, the peaceful rhythm of her feeding, and the knowledge that she wasn't going to let anyone shame her for doing the most natural thing in the world. Just as Maya was about to say something, her throat tight, and her words tangled with emotion, a voice from behind her broke through the tension. "I think you're doing just fine. No one should tell you how to feed your baby," the voice said, clear and steady. Maya turned around, startled, her heart skipping a beat. A man in his 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile was looking at her. He had a baby of his own sitting on his lap, a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. The man's expression was open and supportive, not like the harsh judgment she had just received. The baby on his lap giggled, reaching for a small toy, oblivious to the growing tension in the cabin. The woman across from Maya, who had been so quick to judge, glared at the man but remained silent. Maya could feel the change in the atmosphere. The woman didn't argue, didn't fight back. She just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, as if she were about to say something but then decided against it. The man's words rang in Maya's ears, and a small weight lifted from her shoulders. Her breathing slowed, and for the first time in the last few minutes, she felt a flicker of relief. Maya smiled back at the man, her gratitude immediate and genuine. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still shaky but filled with emotion. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. It wasn't just the words that helped. It was the fact that someone had stood up for her, and by extension, for every mother who had ever been made to feel ashamed of something as natural as breastfeeding. But as Maya turned her attention back to the rest of the passengers, her newfound confidence faltered. The room seemed to feel heavier again. Despite the man's kind words, the discomfort still lingered. Maya could see the looks from some of the other passengers, the disapproving glances, the turned heads. People whispered behind their magazines or pretended to focus on their own business, but Maya knew they were watching her too. The pressure of it all began to creep back in. The woman who had confronted Maya didn't say anything more, but her presence still felt like a shadow hanging over them. She was silent, but the tension in the air between her and Maya was palpable. Was she judging her? Was she waiting for Maya to do something wrong? Maya wanted to believe that the man's words would be enough to change things, but she couldn't help but wonder if the woman would escalate it again. Just as Maya started to feel the pressure building again, something even more unexpected happened. The flight attendant came down the aisle, a bright smile on her face. She stopped by Maya's row, her eyes catching Maya's gaze. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant said, her voice warm and reassuring. "I just wanted to let you know that we fully support you here. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. You're doing great." Maya blinked, taken aback by the kindness in the attendant's eyes. She hadn't expected the flight crew to intervene in a situation like this, but hearing the attendant's words made her feel seen, like she wasn't alone in her fight. The woman who had confronted Maya looked stunned, her mouth slightly ajar, as if she hadn't anticipated the support Maya was receiving. She glanced at the flight attendant, who stood firm, her arms crossed with quiet authority. The woman did not respond, her eyes flicking away as if she were suddenly unsure of her position. Maya's heart swelled. She felt the power of the words, the support from the man behind her, from the flight attendant. The weight of shame that had threatened to crush her was starting to lift. The tension didn't vanish entirely, but for the first time, Maya felt empowered. She looked down at Emma, whose eyes were fluttering shut, a serene smile on her face as she continued nursing. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the support of those around her, even from people she didn't know. It wasn't just about standing up to the woman anymore. It was about reclaiming her right to be a mother in the world. And she knew, deep down, that she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. As the flight continued, Maya felt a quiet confidence growing within her, a sense of peace that she hadn't had before. She knew that, no matter what, she had done nothing wrong. And with the support she had received, she was ready to face whatever came next. Maya watched in confusion as the woman who had shamed her for breastfeeding suddenly stood up and started walking down the aisle. She was puzzled. What was the woman going to do now? Was she going to report Maya to the flight attendants? Was there more she was going to say, more judgment to pour out? Maya tried to steel herself for whatever might come next, but what happened next caught her completely off guard. The woman didn't walk toward the flight attendants, as Maya had expected. Instead, she marched all the way to the front of the plane, where she stopped and turned around. Maya couldn't make sense of it. The woman said something to the flight attendants that Maya couldn't hear, but the flight attendants' smiles were noticeably strained. They nodded and glanced back at Maya, looking like they were preparing for something that Maya had no idea about. Then one of the flight attendants approached Maya's row, her voice soft but carrying. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've had a complaint about your behavior, but don't worry. We're here to support you." Maya's heart skipped a beat. A complaint. Was the woman reporting her for breastfeeding in public? She wasn't sure how to react, her mind racing. But before Maya could say anything, the woman from across the aisle turned red, her face flushing with anger. She marched back toward the attendants, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? What's this about?" The flight attendant maintained her calm, unaffected by the woman's outburst. "Well," she continued smoothly, "we received a complaint about how loudly you were speaking earlier, disturbing other passengers. We've had several complaints from people around you, so we're moving you to the back of the plane." Maya blinked, unable to process the words. She had heard it correctly, right? The woman who had caused all the discomfort and tension was now the one facing consequences. Maya's mind raced. She couldn't believe it. The woman who had tried to shame her for doing something completely natural had actually been the one disturbing others with her loud, disapproving remarks. The woman's face went pale, and she stammered, trying to protest, but the flight attendants were firm. They didn't entertain her arguments. With a polite but unwavering professionalism, they escorted her to the back of the plane, leaving Maya in stunned silence. As the woman passed by her seat, Maya's breath caught. The woman didn't meet her eyes. She didn't say another word. She just hurried down the aisle, clearly embarrassed, as the other passengers who had overheard the exchange shifted in their seats, some glancing at Maya with a look of quiet support. Maya felt her heart racing, not with fear or anxiety this time, but with something else, something like quiet triumph. The man behind Maya, the one who had spoken up in her defense earlier, smiled at her again. "Some people just don't know when to mind their business," he said with a wink, his voice light and full of understanding. Maya couldn't help but smile back. She had been worried, unsure of how things would play out. But in the end, things had unfolded in a way she hadn't expected. Maya was speechless, still processing what had just happened. She had stood her ground, but she hadn't anticipated that the woman would actually be removed from her seat. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Not only had she been supported by the man behind her, the flight attendant, and even some of the passengers who hadn't spoken but had silently backed her up, but the person who had tried to shame her was the one who faced the consequences. Maya looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep in her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the plane. A soft sense of relief washed over Maya. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply fed her child in the way that she knew was best. She hadn't been the one causing discomfort. Others had. And now, they were the ones who had to face the consequences. The rest of the flight went smoothly. The tension had lifted, and Maya could feel the weight of the situation slipping away. As she held Emma close, her body relaxed, and a quiet sense of triumph began to take root inside her. Maya had learned something important. Sometimes, the most shocking twists come when you least expect them. You can stand up for yourself and find support in the most surprising places. And sometimes, the people who try to make you feel small are the ones who end up facing the consequences. As the plane soared higher, Maya knew that no matter what came next, she would always stand firm in her rights as a mother. The world could throw its judgments her way, but she was strong enough to rise above them, supported by those who truly understood. What an incredible journey! If you were inspired by Maya's strength and the surprising twists in her story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know how you felt about the unexpected turn of events. And remember, your voice matters. Never let anyone make you feel small. Stay tuned for more empowering stories. And thanks for being a part of our community.